Okay, we're up to Chaf Hey Amud Beis 25b1, first column, second paragraph, back in Baltimore. Amar Rav Zera, and I look forward to seeing many of you in person tomorrow. Amar Rav Zera, Madina b'karpav shenifretz melo lechatzer sha'aser. Rav Zera says, I agree in the case of a karpef, which is exactly to Beisa, that was breached in its entirety to a chatzer, that the karpaf is prohibited. Okay, so let's review. Rav Zera yesterday told us that when you have a karpef and part of it is uncovered, part of it is covered, we see those two separate places, and even though combined they are more than 2 sa, well over 2 sa, nonetheless, since the uncovered space is 2 sa or less, and the covered space is not considered connected to it, therefore you're allowed to carry it. However, Rav Zera says in the case we have a karpef, which was breached in its entirety to a chatzar, meaning you have one wall of a karpef, 3 walls of a karpef on both sides, and then the fourth wall is completely missing, and it opens up into a chatzar, which is a larger space. The chatzar is a courtyard with houses in it. Okay, so it's karpef, which opens up into the space. The karpef itself was 2 sa, which was the maximum amount. Okay, so as long as it's 2 sa, you could carry in it. But now that it opens up into the chatzar, now there is more space. So Rav Zera says, there I agree it's asur, even though in the case of the roof, part of it's roof, part of it is not roofed. He says we do not combine them together. Over here, he does combine them. My timer, why is this? Hoel va'avir chatzar miyatzer, because the space of the chatzar combines the karpef to make it forbidden. Okay, now obviously we have to understand why is this different in the case of the roof, where it's seen as separate. Here, the courtyard it combines. Okay, but before we get to that question, ask the Gemara, what's going on over here? The chatzar was a permitted space. The chatzar is a permitted space, and now that it's being open, now the karpef is being opened up into a permitted space, it's going to cause the 2 areas to be forbidden. What's going on over here? So Abaye, his student, responds back to him, Amr le Abaye, come on, who is your question fit with? Rav Shimon, like Rav Shimon, right? Because Rav Shimon was the one who held that when you have different, even if you have 2 permitted spaces, when you have the Chacham said you have 2 permitted spaces, but they're different types of permitted spaces, you can't carry one to another. Whereas Rav Shimon, if you recall, said you are allowed to carry one from another from its 2 permitted spaces. So the Gemara says, Rav Shimon, this is like Rav Shimon, the Rav Shimon Nami, Ha'ika Avir Mekom Mechitzos. So even if you want to say this according to Rav Shimon, there is the space of the partitions which have been uncovered. What's he saying? What he's saying is like this. He's saying, you're right. The chatzar itself, that the karpef opened into, that was permitted space. And therefore, because it's not because the chatzar that the space is now going to be considered forbidden. It's not that we're now calculating an entire chatzar. Rather, what's happening is like this. The karpef was exactly 2 sa. And now there's the place of the wall which is knocked down. Those inches of the wall, almost inches of the wall, are now going to be included into the karpef space, because that is where the wall was, and now it's not there, so it's going to be included in the karpef space, and because of that wall, that's why the entire karpef is going to be forbidden. Okay, and now we're bringing proof to this, right? You understand? If you're following the pictures, it's a lot easier. So pull over to the side of the road if you're driving. Okay, but basically you see the chatzar. There is a courtyard with the houses. There is the karpef, which is exactly 2 Beisa, but now with the missing, now with the wall being knocked down, that space is included, and that's why it's going to be usher, because now it's more than 2 sa. The chatzar would not have invalidated it, because the chatzar, certainly according to Rav Zera, is seen as a separate space. It's the wall space, which now brings us to more than 2 sa. That's why the entire space is going to be asur. Okay, and now we're going to bring a proof to Amar Rav Chisda. Okay, Rav Chisda taught karpef shenifretz melo lechatzer. Karpef was breached in its entirety to a chatzar. Chatzar muteras v'karpef asur. Carrying the chatzar is permitted, and carrying the karpef is prohibited. Okay, so now the Gemara analyzes. What did Rav Chisda mean when he says that a karpef that's breached in its entirety to a chatzar? What's the case? Chatzar my timer. What's the reason? The isle gipute. The reason that the chatzar you're allowed to carry in the chatzar is because if you're standing in the chatzar, it's true there's a huge breach, but if you're standing in the chatzar, you have obviously the 3 walls of the chatzar, but then the adjoining wall between the karpef and the chatzar. From the chatzar's perspective, you have partitions on the side, right, that are still there. Again, if you look in the picture, it's going to be a lot easier. You have the partitions on the side, which are still there, and then there's the space in the middle, which is missing. So from the karpef's perspective, the entire 4th wall is missing. From the chatzar's perspective, you have partitions closing off part of the wall. So ask the Gemara, but why would Rav Chisda say such a confusing statement, saying that if a karpef, which it's breached in its entirety to a chatzar, then the chatzar is allowed and the karpef is not, you're not allowed to carry in the karpef. Why is that? Because we're saying the chatzar is going to have 4 walls, or at least like 3 walls and 2 parts. But there are times when you could have the same exact mirror image. In other words, the karpef is going to be such that it's going to have that fourth wall with a breach in it, and the Chatzar is going to be missing its fourth wall. It's like, why would Chisda confusingly talk about one being a karpef, one being a Chatzar, and what's going on here? Ella, it must be, the reason he does this is because it's not about the fact that one opens up into the other. We're not including the airspace of the chatzar. Rather, the reason Chisda said that if a karpef opens up into a courtyard, the reason it's going to be it's going to cause the karpef to become forbidden is because a karpef, if you have more than the space of 2,000 of 2 besa, then it is going to be usher, and therefore the wall space that's now missing, it's going to cause the karpef to be usher. But if you were to have the flip, where it's the chatzar's wall got breached, and now there's 2 extra inches, amos, whatever, for the chatzar, it doesn't matter, because the chatzar, there's no limitation on the size of a chatzar. As long as it's walled in, it's walled in. Okay, fine. And therefore the Gemara now support that. Therefore that was a support, and that's what Rav Zera was saying. Rav Zera was saying that the reason that the karpef is going to be, when it opens up into the chatzar, is going to be aser, is because the wall space that connected the two is now going to be counted as part of the karpef, and now the karpef is more than 2 sa. Okay, now we bring a story. Who bustana da'avasamach luguda da'apana. There was an orchard that was adjacent to the wall of a mansion. Okay, so you had a house, just a house, and one wall, a mansion, one wall of the house was a wall that surrounded an orchard. Okay, nafal ashisa bariasa dapana. The outer wall of the mansion, which again served as the wall of the orchard, collapsed. Now, all the other walls were walls that were just built around the orchard. The fourth wall was built, afterwards, and was built as a way of enclosing it for residential purposes. Now, you don't really have a wall that was enclosed for residential purposes, so therefore, this orchard should now be considered a karpef, and therefore you shouldn't be able to carry there. However, granted, the outer wall of the mansion is no longer standing, but the inner wall of the mansion is still standing, and therefore you should be able to carry the whole thing. Because you descend from short-lived people, you say short, or i.e. incorrect things. Okay, apparently being short is incorrect. No, just kidding. But basically, what in the world? What is he talking about? So Rabibi was a descendant. It was a descendant of Eli HaKohen, and there was a curse to Eli's family that they would all die young. So he says, because you come from a short-lived people, you're going to say truncated, right? Meaning short, like incorrect things. Okay, again, the rabbis, they spoke very sharply one to another, and he says, you can't use that inner wall to now be considered the wall of this karpef. Why? The inner walls were made for the inside of the house. They were never made for the outer part of the house. In other words, no one assumes that, when I build the outer wall when I build like the other side of the house, the reason this wall is standing here is because in case one wall breaks, that wall is still going to function. No, you don't think like that. So the outer wall that was built, that it was adjacent to the orchard, that was built for the orchard, and therefore it enclosed it and made it no longer a karpef for just an orchard, but it was it was now walled in for residential purposes. But when it fell down, you can't say, but you still have the inner wall, and that wall was there because you never intended for that inner wall to really be enclosing the orchard, and therefore you need to do something else to make this, to wall it in for residential purposes. We are going to stop here. Have a great day.